The cast-out ones. The judgment hall of the Velther Conclave did not resemble any place of justice the Lyravi had ever known. It was too large, too bright, too cold in its symmetry, an engineered geometry of dominance rather than fairness. Vast arcs of suspended platforms floated in a circular abyss, each one occupied by a species that had long since learned how to survive by making others unnecessary. The Lyravi stood on the smallest platform. They did not stand proudly. Their physiology made pride a quiet thing, subtle posture shifts, gentle color changes along their translucent skin. Even now, those colors flickered unevenly, betraying stress. They were fragile in a way the galaxy had never forgiven. Above them, the Conclave representatives shifted in their seats, exchanging data streams and biometric projections rather than words. The accusation was not a crime in the traditional sense. It was simpler than that. Irrelevance. A towering delegate from the Dravic Dominion leaned forward, its armored mandibles clicking as it projected the verdict into shared space. The Lyravi contribute no measurable military value, it declared. No strategic deterrence. No adaptive warfare capacity. No expansion capability. Their biological limitations render them unfit for participation in the modern galactic order. A second voice followed, smoother, almost bored. The Selkaran Trade Union representative flicked through economic projections that showed the Lyravi as statistically negligible. They are consumers without leverage, it added. Protected assets without return. A liability maintained out of outdated moral habit. The Lyravi did not interrupt. They never did. Their culture had not evolved through conquest or resistance, but through observation and preservation. They recorded. They remembered. They endured. At the center of their platform stood Archivist Prime Selvora. Their form was slightly taller than the others, their skin patterns deeper in hue, like ink suspended in water. They carried the collective memory of their people, not as authority, but as responsibility. When the conclave fell silent, Selvora spoke. "We have never claimed to be warriors," they said calmly. "We have never expanded beyond necessity. We have never consumed more than our systems require to remain stable." A ripple of disdain moved through the surrounding delegates. Selvora continued. "We preserved knowledge during the collapse of Archon 9. We stabilized biospheres abandoned by your expansion fleets. We archive languages lost to extinction, events your wars created." A brief pause. "And yet, you call us irrelevant." The Dravic delegates' mandibles tightened. Relevance is determined by survival capability in conflict, not sentiment. That statement ended the debate before it truly began. The ruling was transmitted instantly across the Conclave network. No voting delay. No appeal cycle. Efficiency, they called it. Exile. The Lyravi species would be stripped of interstellar protections. Their trade rights dissolved. Their diplomatic immunity revoked. Their vessels would no longer be recognized under Conclave law. They were not sentenced to death. They were sentenced to absence. As the verdict settled into reality, the chamber lights dimmed slightly, as though even the station itself had concluded the matter was complete. On the Lyravi fleet, far beyond the Conclave hall, silence spread like a disease. Their ships were not built for war. They were slender, layered with observation arrays and life preservation systems. They were vessels designed for migration, research, and refuge, not confrontation. Now they drifted alone in unregulated space. Inside the lead vessel, the atmosphere was dim and steady. The Lyravi did not panic loudly. Their biology made such expressions inefficient. Instead, stress manifested as reduced movement, slower communication pulses, and fading luminal skin patterns. Entire families sat together in quiet clusters, conserving energy. Elders ran calculations no one wanted to hear spoken aloud. "How long until auxiliary oxygen depletion?" one asked softly. 17 cycles, came the answer. A child nearby listened, not fully understanding, but sensing the gravity in the adult's stillness. At the center of it all, Selvora stood before a hollow projection of the galaxy. Their fleet was marked as a drifting anomaly, outside jurisdiction, outside protection, outside concern. "We will not scatter," Selvora said finally. Heads turned slightly toward them. "If we disperse, we become data points. Lost transmissions. Forgotten remnants. Together, we remain a record." A pause followed, heavy and unanimous in its understanding. Selvora activated the final transmission array. The signal they sent was not encoded in military cipher, not in diplomatic formality. It carried no demands, no threats, no negotiations. Only a question, translated into every known linguistic pattern they possessed. "Is there anyone who remembers mercy?" The message propagated into unmapped space, beyond conclave monitoring grids, beyond sanction routes, into the dark regions where even predators hesitated to claim ownership. Then the Lyravi did something the galaxy had never seen them do before. They waited. Far away, in a region of space considered unremarkable by most galactic charts, a human relay station blinked awake. It was not large. It was not ancient. It was not important by conclave standards. But it was human-made, and that meant it was designed to notice things others ignored. The operator stared at the incoming transmission. "Unknown origin," she said slowly. "No registry match. No threat signature." A second officer leaned in. Language structure? Fragmented, but emotional weighting detected. Commander Hayes arrived moments later, still fastening his jacket. He studied the data stream as it replayed. "Is there anyone who remembers mercy?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched the silence that followed it. Finally, he spoke. "That's not a distress call from something dangerous," he said. "That's a distress call from something that already believes it's been erased." The room fell quiet. One of the analysts asked the question no one wanted to own. "Do we respond?" Hayes looked at the drifting signal again, as if it might disappear if ignored long enough. Then he nodded. "Yes," he said, "we respond." And with that decision, humanity reached into the dark, not as conquerors, not as saviors, but simply as the first voice in a long time willing to answer. First contact in the dark. The Lyravi fleet did not understand silence the way humans did. For them, silence was not absence, it was deterioration. It meant systems were failing, communication density was dropping, and survival probability was collapsing into statistical insignificance. So when the unknown vessel arrived, and no immediate threat followed, the silence itself became more alarming than an attack would have been. Inside the lead ship, sensors flickered across exhausted displays. A junior technician spoke first, voice thin. "New mass detected. Stable orbit insertion. No hostile emissions." Another replied without looking up. "That does not make sense. Nothing that entered conclave-controlled space without permission arrived without intent to dominate, extract, or evaluate. Everything had purpose. Everything had cost. This had neither, at least none they could detect." At the center of the command chamber stood Archivist Prime Selvora. Their posture was still, but their skin patterns shifted slowly in muted tones, an internal language of uncertainty. "Identify origin signature," Selvora ordered. The reply came after a delay. "Unknown designation. No conclave registry match. No known trait alignment. No war signature." A pause. Then, more quietly, "It is not broadcasting hostility." That was the second impossibility. Outside, the UNS Horizon's edge held position like a patient observer. On the bridge, Captain Mira Cade studied the cluster of Lyravi ships drifting ahead. They were smaller than expected, fragile silhouettes layered with external modules that looked improvised, not designed for combat or endurance in hostile environments. "They're holding formation," Patel noted, "but it's unstable. They're conserving power aggressively." Rel adjusted the scan feed. "Their life support margins are below safety thresholds. Some ships are operating at critical minimum." Mira frowned. "They've been abandoned long enough to learn how to wait for death." No one responded, because no one had a correction. The first human transmission was deliberately simple. Mira opened the channel. "This is UNS Horizon's Edge," she said calmly. "Human Union exploratory vessel. We're not here to engage in conflict. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. We received your signal. Silence followed. No response. Not even acknowledgement. Patel leaned forward. They're not replying. They're processing, Mira corrected quietly. Rel glanced at her. Or they're deciding if responding makes them visible. Mira nodded. Same thing. Inside the Lyravi fleet, fear had a different texture. It was not loud or chaotic. It was structural. Systems began shutting down non-essential feedback loops automatically. Lighting dimmed in unison. Secondary circulation slowed. Entire sections of ships reduced emissions to near-zero levels. They were trying to become unseen, not because they were safe, but because visibility had always meant vulnerability. Selvora observed the pattern with growing unease. This is not conclave behavior, a technician whispered. It is survival conditioning, another replied. Selvora did not correct them, because they were not wrong. And yet something about the unknown vessel did not fit that pattern. It had not moved closer. It had not scanned aggressively. It had not demanded identification codes. It had simply arrived and waited. A second transmission came from humanity. This time, it was not language. It was data, environmental stabilization algorithms, oxygen recycling optimization, energy distribution balancing, biological compatibility estimates. The Lyravi command systems struggled to interpret it. One junior scientist froze mid-analysis. They're sending us corrections. Corrections to what? Someone asked. To our survival efficiency. That statement caused a ripple of confusion across the chamber, because no conclave species corrected another without intent to control them. Selvora studied the incoming data longer than protocol required. This is not enforcement logic, they said slowly. Then what is it? A technician asked. Selvora hesitated. Assistance without claim. The phrase did not exist in their historical archive. On the UNS Horizon's edge, engineering teams monitored feedback. They're not rejecting the data, Patel said, but they're not integrating it either. Rel frowned. It's like they don't trust improvement unless it comes with ownership attached. Mira exhaled slowly. That's because everything they've ever experienced came with ownership attached. She turned slightly. Send compatibility overlays. No access requests. No binding protocols. Patel blinked. That's inefficient. Mira met his gaze. So, is letting them die because we didn't format the help correctly? The shift happened gradually. At first, one Lyravi vessel accepted a stabilization buoy. Then another allowed external power supplementation. Then, almost imperceptibly, communication channels expanded from narrow bursts into sustained exchange. Not trust, not yet, but exposure. Inside the fleet, Selvora noticed something that unsettled them more than any external threat ever had. The humans were not trying to define the Lyravi. They were responding to them as they were. Not as a category, not as an asset, not as a liability, as a presence. A young Lyravi technician finally spoke what many had been silently calculating. If they wanted to harvest us, she said softly, they would have begun scanning biological yield parameters by now. Silence followed. Another voice added, uncertain, or issued compliance enforcement requests. A pause, and they have done neither. Selvora turned slightly toward the observation array. The human vessel remained steady. Unarmed posture maintained. Distance respected. No escalation. For the first time in recorded Lyravi encounter history, there was no framework to explain it. Captain Mira Cade watched the same fleet from her viewport. They're stabilizing, Patel said. Not because we fixed them, Rel added. Because they let us try. Mira nodded slowly. That's the difference. She paused. They're not used to help that doesn't demand something back. Inside the Lyravi fleet, Selvora made a decision. Not strategic, not political, historical. Open controlled response channel, they said. A technician hesitated. At what level of disclosure? Selvora looked once more at the human vessel. Honest, they said. A pause. Then softer. For the first time, and in the cold dark between fleets, where the galaxy expected hierarchy, exploitation, and silence, Two civilizations began their first fragile conversation, not as conqueror and subject, not as savior and dependent, but as something the Conclave had never prepared for. Equal uncertainty. The galaxy notices humanity. The galaxy did not react to kindness. It reacted to disruption. For several cycles after first contact, the Lyravi situation remained buried beneath routine data streams, classified as a minor anomaly at the edge of unregulated space. A drifting species stabilized by an emerging civilization was, at first, not worth immediate intervention, until the numbers changed. Abruptly, in the Velther Conclave's observation nexus, a Selkaran analyst paused mid-calculation. "That is incorrect," it said flatly. Across the projection, the Lyravi fleet, previously marked for terminal decline, now displayed sustained life support stability, coordinated energy flow, and minimal structural repair across multiple vessels. Another analyst recalibrated the data. "No error," it confirmed. "External assistance confirmed." Source: Human Union vessel. A Dravic commander leaned forward, armored limbs tightening. "Clarify," it demanded. The response came without hesitation. "The Lyravi are no longer in collapse." Silence followed. Not confusion, recognition. Something had interfered with inevitability. Within a single cycle, the conclave chamber convened. Delegates filled their suspended platforms, their attention fixed on a shared projection. A single human vessel maintaining position beside the Lyravi fleet, surrounded by stabilization drones and energy buoys. "They are preserving them," a Selkaran voice observed. "They are violating exile protocol," the Dravic replied sharply. A third delegate interjected, tone edged with irritation. "Exile is not a temporary condition. It is termination through attrition." The chamber shifted, because the truth had been spoken too plainly. The Lyravi had not been expected to survive, and now they were. A diplomatic summons was issued. Humanity answered. The image of Ambassador Jonah Reyes appeared within the conclave projection field, seated calmly, hands folded as though the weight of the chamber's hostility did not exist. "You are interfering with a lawful process," the Dravic declared immediately. "Return the Lyravi to conclave custody." Jonah tilted his head slightly. "Custody," he repeated. "That's one way to describe abandonment." A ripple of disapproval moved through the delegates. The Selkaran representative responded. They were deemed non-viable under continuity standards. Jonah leaned forward, expression steady. "And that makes them disposable." No one answered directly, because under conclave logic, the answer was implicit. Yes. Jonah stood. The motion was simple, but it drew attention. Human posture carried none of the submission signals most species displayed under pressure. It was not dominance, either. It was something quieter, refusal to bend. "We're not returning them," he said. The chamber stirred. "You do not possess jurisdiction," the Dravic warned. Jonah nodded once. "That's true." A pause. "We're not asking for it." That statement landed harder than defiance. It was independence. At the edge of mapped space, independence translated into action. The UNS Horizon's edge held steady near the Lyravi fleet, its systems running in quiet synchronization with the fragile vessels behind it. Stabilization fields pulsed. Repair drones moved with deliberate care. Oxygen levels across multiple Lyravi ships rose incrementally above critical thresholds. But the greater shift was internal. Inside the fleet, Lyravi behavior began to change. They were no longer shutting down systems in preparation for collapse. They were maintaining them, activating them, choosing to continue. A junior technician reported it with quiet disbelief. "We are sustaining non-essential processes," she said. Another paused. "Why?" The answer came slowly. "Because survival is no longer temporary." Archivist Prime Selvora stood within the central archive chamber, watching new entries form. They were no longer documenting extinction probabilities. They were recording recovery, continuation, human interaction. A junior archivist approached, hesitant. "Outer system scans confirm approaching conclave vessels," she said. "Enforcement classification." Selvora did not turn. They have noticed, they said. A pause. They always do. But something in their tone had changed. Not resignation. Assessment. The Conclave flotilla arrived without ceremony. Its formation was precise, controlled, an expression of authority rather than aggression. Yet its scale dwarfed both the Lyravi fleet and the lone human vessel. A transmission followed immediately. Human vessel, disengage. Lyravi units, return to Conclave custody. Non-compliance will result in enforcement action. On the horizon's edge, the message was received in silence. Captain Mira Cade studied the tactical display. They're asserting control, Patel said. They're expecting compliance, Rel added. Mira nodded once. Then they don't understand the situation yet. She opened a channel. This is Captain Mira Cade of the UNS Horizon's Edge. Her voice carried evenly across the void. We will not be relinquishing any sentient beings under our protection. The response came instantly. You are obstructing lawful governance. Myra's gaze did not shift. Then your law needs revision, she said. The words rippled across both fleets. Inside the Lyravi vessels, sensors recorded elevated neural activity, an unfamiliar pattern bordering on something close to anticipation. Selvora watched the human ship carefully. They are not retreating, a junior archivist said. Selvora inclined their head slightly. No, they replied. They're defining themselves. On the Conclave side, weapons systems began to align. Energy signatures rose. Target locks formed. But something held the final command in suspension. Humanity had not escalated. It had not threatened. It had simply refused. And that refusal carried a variable the Conclave had not accounted for. Uncertainty. On the horizon's edge, the bridge remained still. Patel glanced at Mira. If they fire... I know, she said. Rel looked between them. Then why hold position? Mira answered without hesitation. Because moving now tells them they're right. A pause. And they're not. Outside, the distance between fleets remained unchanged. Between them hung more than silence. It was tension shaped into possibility. For the first time in Conclave history, a developing species stood against established authority. Not through force, but through conviction. And the galaxy, built on dominance and calculation, found itself confronting something far more difficult to quantify. A line that would not move. Not because it lacked strength, but because it had already chosen its ground. A new alliance. The Conclave flotilla did not fire. Not immediately. That hesitation was not mercy, it was calculation. The human ship had not retreated, not surrendered, not even attempted negotiation under pressure. It simply remained in place, like a fixed point in a system that expected everything to yield. On tactical feeds, Conclave commanders reassessed probabilities. Engagement outcome, uncertain. Human behavioral pattern, non-compliant but non-aggressive. Collateral outcome, unpredictable. And unpredictability in Conclave doctrine was risk. So the weapons remained charged but silent. For now. On the UNS Horizon's edge, silence felt different. It was not the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of choice. Captain Mira Cade stood at the forward viewport, watching the distant alignment of hostile ships suspended in darkness like sharpened thoughts, waiting for permission to become action. Behind her, Patel broke the tension. They're hesitating. Rel frowned at the readouts. That's new. Mira didn't turn. No, she said. That's human. Inside the Lyravi fleet, something even more unexpected was happening. They were no longer preparing for immediate death. For the first time since exile, systems were not being shut down for conservation alone. They were being reactivated for recovery. Human stabilization drones moved like patient insects across damaged hull segments. Energy buoys pulsed steadily, maintaining environmental balance. And slowly, almost cautiously, Lyravi ships began to function again, not as drifting ruins, but as surviving vessels. Archivist Prime Selvora observed it all with quiet disbelief. A junior archivist approached. We are registering long-term viability increases across all vessels, she reported. If sustained, full fleet recovery is possible. Selvora did not respond immediately. Instead, they watched a maintenance drone repair a failing oxygen regulator without asking for control authorization, ownership transfer, or compliance data. It simply fixed it, then moved on. Finally, Selvora spoke. In all Conclave records, they said softly, aid is conditional. The archivist hesitated. This is not conditional. No, Selvora agreed. A pause. That is what makes it unstable. The Conclave broke first. A secondary enforcement cruiser detached from formation and sent a final warning burst. Last compliance notice. Relinquish Lyravi assets. Mira received it without expression. Patel looked at her. If they fire, we don't have a tactical answer. I know, she said again. Rel leaned forward. Then what are we doing here? Mira finally turned. We're defining the boundary, she said. For them. For us. For whatever comes after. She stepped closer to the comms. Open all channels. Her voice went out across open space, not just to the Conclave, but to the Lyravi fleet drifting behind them. This is Captain Miracade, she said. A pause. We are not leaving. The words landed like a shift in gravity. Inside the Lyravi fleet, several systems registered emotional spikes, something their translators struggled to categorize. Not fear, not relief, recognition. Mira continued. These vessels are under human union protection. That means they are not assets. They are not property. They are people. A beat. And people don't get returned. The Conclave responded with immediate escalation. Weapons arrays fully charged. Target locks confirmed. But still, no firing command. Because something unfamiliar had entered the equation. Human presence was no longer a variable that could be ignored. It was a variable that changed outcomes. And that was unacceptable. Then something unexpected happened. From within the Lyravi fleet, a transmission was broadcast. Not by humans, not by Conclave Command, but by Selvora. It was not translated into Conclave standard. It was sent in raw harmonic structure, forcing translation systems to struggle. Human linguists received it first. Patel frowned. They're broadcasting. Rel scanned the output. It's not a request. Mira watched quietly. Play it. The translation stabilized slowly. We have been declared irrelevant. A pause. We have recorded the consequences of relevance, defined only by destruction capability. Another pause. We accept human classification as different. The bridge went still. Then the final line resolved. We will remain with them. Inside the Conclave formation, that statement triggered immediate outrage. They're influencing the asset. They are corrupting controlled exile parameters. Terminate both parties. But even as commands escalated, hesitation persisted. Because something else was becoming clear. The Lyravi were not being forced. They were choosing. And the humans were not extracting value. They were providing stability. Neither condition matched Conclave logic, which meant Conclave logic was failing. Selvora continued transmitting. We were told we are weak. A pause. We now observe that weakness is defined by those who require violence to validate existence. The translation paused again, struggling, then completed. We do not wish to be strong in that way. On the horizon's edge, Mira closed her eyes for a moment, not in relief, in understanding. The Conclave commander made the final decision. Prepare disengagement protocol. It ordered reluctantly. We will reassess after recalibration of threat classification models. The flotilla did not retreat. It recalibrated. And in that adjustment, humanity was marked for something more dangerous than war. Attention! After the Conclave ships shifted away into observational orbit, silence returned to the drift zone. But it was no longer the same silence as before. It was shared. On the horizon's edge, Patel finally spoke. They're not gone. Just watching. Mira nodded. That's fine. Rel looked at her. That's fine. Mira watched the Lyravi fleet stabilize behind them. No longer dying, no longer drifting alone. They're supposed to watch, she said. That's how change starts in this place. Inside the Lyravi fleet, Selvora stood before the central archive. New entries were forming themselves automatically. Not records of extinction, but records of continuation. A junior archivist approached quietly. What do we call this? She asked. Salvora considered the question for a long moment, then answered, not exile anymore. A pause. Arrival.